Sunday we looked at Jeremiah chapter 1, which was Jeremiah reflecting back in his life on that moment when God revealed to him his purpose for Jeremiah's life. And one of the things that we looked at in Jeremiah chapter 1 was how Jeremiah's third word changed. And you may recall, the third word is any word or phrase that we use to complete the sentence, I am, and then we fill that blank in. And you may recall that Jeremiah said to God, I am only a child. And a few verses later, a little later in that dialogue between Jeremiah and God says, don't ever say that again. Don't ever say that again. Let me give you some new third words. He said, Jeremiah, you're a fortified city. You're an iron pillar. You're a bronze wall. And what an amazing kind of then path and future that Jeremiah was to embark upon with that new set of third words. Well, this morning we're going to look at Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to see that in this case, the reverse takes place. A person starts with a powerful third word, but then begins to turn from God to other sources for identity, and those third word changes. And so, in Genesis chapter 2, verses 15 and 17, just to give a little context for then Genesis chapter 3, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for if you eat of it, you will surely die. Now Genesis 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say, you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it, or you will surely die. You will not surely die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden. In the cool of the day, they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, where are you? He answered, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And God said, who told you that you were naked? Let me tell you, there is so much in those opening narratives of Genesis, from creation in Genesis 1 to what we find here in Genesis chapter 3, going forward to Cain and Abel, and so on. And you know that all Judeo-Christian theology resides, has as its foundation those narratives in the book of Genesis. In fact, when I was in seminary and took systematic theology, which everybody had to take systematic theology, regardless of what your major was. Systematic theology always began with the book of Genesis, because that becomes a theological framework for everything else then that proceeds through Scripture, including the Gospels, because Genesis lays all of that theological groundwork, understanding our nature, understanding God's nature, understanding how we're interrelated and connected or disconnected, as the case may be. So I'm just taking a slice of one of these great narratives in Genesis chapter 3. But I hope we can learn some things from this great story, this great narrative, particularly when it comes to this issue of third word, of understanding identity. You know, the enemy asks a question. And the question is, did God really say? And then from that question emerges then a conversation. And you know, sometimes, and this is just a little sidebar, sometimes you and I get in a mess, not because we've had wrong information, but because we've engaged in wrong conversations. And so this conversation begins with the enemy looking at the woman and says, did God really say? And the way in which he quotes God isn't really accurate, is it? Because, see, the enemy does not have the power, does not have the ability to cancel any promises of God, or to completely conceal any promises of God. So the enemy will do a more subtle and somewhat sinister thing and corrupt the promises of God. And you know, a half-truth is far more powerful than an outright lie. Because see, an outright lie can often be immediately recognized. A half-truth, however, can be bought into hook, line, and sinker without ever realizing that it is a corruption of a truth. So the enemy here poses a half-truth question to the woman. Because again, the enemy can't cancel it, he can't conceal it, the promise of God, and so he's going to corrupt it. And the interesting thing is that what God promised there in Genesis chapter 2, in that little few verses that we use to kind of tee up and give context to what we read in Genesis chapter 3, a powerful third word is given. When God looks at the man, when God looks at Adam, and he says, he commanded the man, and listen to the third word, you are free. That means that in that moment, and from that time forward, Adam could say as his third word, I am free. God had put him in a place where he was free. It was a blessing, it was a promise, it was a word of liberation. Just like those songs that we sang just a few moments ago before I came up on the platform. I am free, my chains are gone. It's a powerful third word, and God gives it to Adam. You are free. Now, the enemy took that command, made it a half-truth, corrupted it, and rather than that promise being a word of liberation, the enemy now makes it a word of limitation. Because the way in which the enemy poses what God has said to the woman is he says, did God really say, you must not? So now the focus is away from freedom and liberation to now one of limitation. Did God really say, you must not? And you know, so many times that can happen to us. That we lose our grip on what is the complete, true, promise of God because we have let some other voice come in, and it has turned that into something it is not. And so rather than being a promise of liberation, you are free, it is now corrupted to a word of limitation, you are not. And because of that, the third words have changed. And so the original third word, Adam's third word, Eve's third word that they've been given is, you are free. I am free. That's gifted to them by God. But now God comes into the garden because they've listened to another voice. And when God asks them, where are you? You know, He's not asking them, are you over near the pine trees or are you in the tomato patch? God is not asking them a question about their physical location. God is asking a much more profound question. Where are you? Where are you psychologically, spiritually? Where are you now in relation to me? Where are you now in relation to one another? And notice the third words that Adam uses here and how different it is from the one he was given. He says, I am afraid. I am naked. I am hid. Wow. Wow. What a difference that has happened. What a difference has happened. And how those third words that give to Adam and Eve their identity have changed so dramatically. I am afraid, I am naked, and I am hidden. And from that, I want to suggest to you come two core principles that can speak to us this morning. The first one is this: the enemy never wants us walking in our God-given identity. Nothing upsets the enemy more than when someone is walking in their God-given identity. Notice what God says when Adam uses these new third words. I'm afraid, I'm naked, I'm hidden. The very next thing that God says is, who told you that? Who told you that you were naked? Implying, it wasn't me. That's not a third word I put to you. Where'd you get that identity from? Is in essence what God is asking Adam here. Can I do another little sidebar with you real quick? I'll tell you a fascinating thing to do in these narratives of Genesis is just to look at all the questions God asks. You just spend some devotional time just looking at all the questions God asks in the opening chapters of Genesis. It's powerful stuff. Who told you that? Where'd you get that identity from? Well, God knows where Adam got that from. Again, he doesn't ask questions for information. God asks questions so that we might engage in reflection. Let me give you another powerful example of just how much the enemy does not want you and I walking in our God-given identity. I did a message on this some months ago, but it bears repeating. Matthew chapter 3 ends with Jesus' baptism. And the closing statement of Matthew chapter 3 is God, the Heavenly Father, His voice, speaking, saying, this is my Son, whom I love, and with whom I am well pleased. Now, in that statement is now Jesus' identity. Jesus is Son of God, loved by God, and God takes tremendous joy in His Son. By the way, that is also our identity You are a child of God who God loves, and He takes great joy in your existence. So Jesus has this now pronounced identity with which to then engage in His public ministry, and the very next thing that happens, very next thing, because these things are so linked, is Matthew chapter 4, which is Jesus in the wilderness. Satan shows up to then tempt Jesus to move away from and out of His God-given identity. And He's going to tempt Him in three ways relative to His identity. He says, Jesus, and I'm just summarizing this, He says, Jesus, why don't you base your identity on what you have? And so Satan says, look at everything, and everything that you can see can be yours. Base your identity on what you can have. Then He says, Jesus, why don't you base your identity on what you can do? And then the third temptation, Jesus, why don't you base your identity on what other people will say about you? Those three temptations are all about moving Jesus out of His God-given identity, because you see, again, the enemy, there's nothing that upsets him more when someone is walking in their God-given identity. Each time that Satan tempts Jesus to move out of His identity into a false one, Jesus responds with, "It is written." And He quotes Scripture. Jesus is what I'll call preloaded. You see, as soon as that temptation comes, Jesus is already preloaded with information to rebut it. And I want to suggest to you this morning that you and I need to be preloaded. That when you and I face the temptations to move out of our God-given identity and to walk in a false identity, we need to be preloaded such that we can claim immediately our God-given identity, and there are no questions about that. There are a couple of websites that I use on a regular basis, and I'm sure this is true for some of you all. And you know, and these are websites where I'm purchasing things. Sometimes a couple of them are websites where I purchase materials for the church or eBay for me. And so anyway, you know, when you get to that last step of the process where then you're going to, you know, you filled up your cart or whatever, and now you're going to go ahead and finalize the order. On a couple of these websites, because I'm so regular, as soon as I get to NEL, boom, all the boxes fill up. My name pops up, my address pops up, the shipping address pops up, payment method pops up. It saves me all of that time from having to complete all of that information, and I love it. You know, just small things in life make me happy, and that's just one of them. But that's preloaded. That's what you and I need to do. Because I'm telling you, the enemy is going to do everything he possibly can to say, hey, why don't you base your identity on what you have, what you possess? Hey, why don't you base your identity on what you did? Hey, why don't you base your identity on what people say about you? There's going to be all of that coming at us to get us out of our God-given identity and walking and being centered in that. And we need to be real. When that happens, we need to say, you know what? It is written, I am part of a holy nation. It is written, I am a part of the body of Christ. It is written that I am well loved by God and He takes joy in my existence. It is written that I am redeemed. It is written that I am a child of God. You see? We need to be preloaded. Because the enemy is going to do everything possible to thwart you, prevent you from walking in your God-given identity. Second, final core lesson from this. The voice we follow will determine our future. Genesis chapter 3 has much more in it than the 11 verses that I shared with you this morning. There are consequences for what happens here. Eden, their participation in it comes to an end. There are consequences because of the voice that they listened to and the path they chose to walk in terms of having an identity. And the same is true for you and me. Whatever voice we listen to that determines our identity is going to determine our future. I was reading an article the other day that talked about an author, quite well-known author, and anyway, he said that he was in Australia and he was catching a flight back to the United States. I've never been to Australia, but I can only imagine what the length of the flight would be, and I think he said his flight was 14 hours. 14 hours. And so he said, knowing I had 14 hours of seat time, he said, I took my laptop, and as soon as we kind of leveled off, I opened the laptop, and he said I was going to start writing. And he said the chatterbox kicked in, the voice kicked in, that, nobody's going to read this book. Oh, why don't you just look at the Sky Mall magazine? Oh, why don't you just sleep and relax? You're too tired to do anything. What you write's not going to be any good, and so on and so on. I know none of that ever happens to us, right? No negative thoughts ever go. So he said he was just sitting there, and he started kind of packing away a little bit at the laptop and looking at what was coming up on the screen and having all these doubts and, thinking, man, I just give up, forget this. And he said the stewardess comes down the aisle, and she says, my goodness, like you're hard at work. And he said, well, I'm trying to write a book. And she said, wow, you're trying to write a book. And so she said, are you an author? And he said, well, yes, in fact, this will be my third book. And she said, well, then you've written 2 books more than the vast majority of the rest of the population. And walked away. And he said, all of a sudden, his entire paradigm shifted. He got fired up. And he said, man, I just started doing it. All because one voice reminded him of who he was. We need that in our lives. We have that in our lives through the Holy Spirit, through the witness of Scripture, through the work of Jesus Christ. You and I have a God-given identity. And that comes with powerful third words. But there are voices out there that will draw us away from it. So I want to ask you this morning, which voice are you listening to for your identity? Let's pray together. Father God, we see something significant happen here in Genesis 3, where the blessing of a liberating third word had been corrupted to one of limitation, and that was then adhered to and a future change. And Lord, we realize that can happen to us. That can happen to us. So Lord, when the enemy comes at us, because the last thing he wants is for us to be walking in the identity you have gifted us, may we be preloaded. May we claim what is ours. And in so doing, we find there a destiny and a future and a purpose that you created for us. So may we know your voice. And from that, know that who we are in you. Well, it's in Jesus'